The 19-year-old peasant girl who had turned the tide of the 100 Years' War now sat chained to a wooden block in an English fortress, guarded by the very soldiers whose armies she had defeated. The woman who had crowned a king would be destroyed by men determined to prove she was no messenger of God, but a heretic deserving only fire. When Burgundian forces captured Joan of Arc at Compiègne on May 23, 1430, they held the most valuable prisoner in France. In November, the English paid 10,000 francs to her Burgundian captors and transferred her to Rouen, the administrative capital of English-occupied France. By December, Joan found herself imprisoned in the castle of Bouvray, a fortress controlled by the Earl of Warwick. The English had purchased the means to destroy the legitimacy of Charles VII himself. Joan's interrogation by English clergy. On January 3, 1431, an edict charged Joan with religious crimes. She would be tried by an ecclesiastical court headed by Pierre Cauchon, Bishop of Beauvais, who had long served as an advisor to the English occupation government. The charges included wearing men's clothing in violation of biblical law, claiming to receive divine visions, and refusing to submit to church authority. The trial would determine whether Joan's victories had been acts of divine will or the work of a heretic guided by demons. The formal interrogations began on February 21, 1431. Joan was led into the chapel of the castle to face Bishop Cauchon and 42 clerics assembled to judge her. She agreed to swear an oath to answer questions truthfully, but refused to reveal anything that might compromise King Charles VII. Between February 21st and March 24th, Joan endured nearly a dozen interrogation sessions. The clerics pressed her relentlessly on 3 issues: the nature of her visions, her refusal to submit to church authority, and her wearing of men's clothing. The clerics attempted to trap her with questions designed to expose heresy, no matter how she answered. When they asked whether she believed she was in a state of grace, Joan understood the snare. Church doctrine held that no person could know with certainty whether they possessed God's grace. If she answered yes, she would contradict church teaching. If she answered no, she would be admitting her visions could not be from God. Joan replied that if she was not in a state of grace, she prayed God would place her there, and if she was, she prayed God would keep her there. Even her interrogators could find no fault with the answer. The initial 70 charges were reduced to 12 articles of accusation. Joan defended herself with such intelligence that some clerics began questioning the proceedings. One tribunal member stepped down, stating the testimony was being coerced to entrap Joan rather than seek truth. Another challenged Cauchon's right to judge the case and was immediately imprisoned. Imprisonment in a male military jail. Throughout the trial, Joan remained imprisoned in conditions that violated every principle of ecclesiastical law. Canon law required that female prisoners accused of heresy be guarded by women, typically nuns, in church prisons. Joan was held in a secular military fortress under the direct control of English military authorities, guarded by common English soldiers who viewed her as an enemy. Joan was chained to a heavy wooden block even when confined to her cell. At times, iron shackles were placed on her feet. Guards were assigned to remain inside her cell at all hours. According to witness testimony from the later rehabilitation trial, 3 guards were stationed inside her cell continuously, with 2 more posted outside. Joan had no privacy and no respite from the constant watch of men who despised her. The guards subjected her to ongoing harassment and abuse. Multiple witnesses later testified that the soldiers taunted her mercilessly and that she lived in constant fear. When she fell seriously ill, suffering from fever and believing she might die, she begged to receive the sacrament and to be buried on sacred ground. Her requests were denied. The Earl of Warwick restrained the guards somewhat, not out of compassion, but because the English had paid the equivalent price of 1,000 horses for her and intended to extract full political value from her condemnation. But the danger Joan faced went beyond harassment. According to testimony given at the rehabilitation trial in 1456, Joan faced repeated physical threats and violations during her imprisonment. One witness stated that a great English lord attempted to assault her. This explains why Joan continued to insist on wearing men's clothing despite the charges it brought against her. Men's clothing, tightly bound and laced, provided protection that a woman's dress could not. Joan argued repeatedly that it was more proper to dress as a man when surrounded by male guards than to wear women's clothing that left her vulnerable. The judges dismissed this reasoning, but the danger was real. The trial itself contained multiple irregularities. Joan was interrogated for weeks before being formally read the charges. She was given no legal counsel. The procedures fell below even minimal inquisitorial standards. The trial took place in Rouen rather than in Joan's home diocese, a breach of canon law. Evidence suggests the trial transcripts were falsified at crucial points to make Joan's statements appear more incriminating than they were. The heresy verdict and execution at Rouen. On May 23, 1431, Joan was brought before the tribunal and informed that theologians from the University of Paris had reviewed her case. Their verdict was unambiguous. Her claims to hear divine voices were judged to be the work of demons. Her wearing of men's clothing was declared unnatural and wicked. Her refusal to submit to church authority made her a heretic. If she would not recant, she would be handed over to secular authorities for execution by burning. The following day, Joan was taken to the cemetery of Saint-Ouen and placed beside a stake. The sight terrified her. Faced with immediate death, weakened by months of imprisonment, abandoned by the king she had crowned, Joan broke. She agreed to sign a form of abjuration, recanting her claims and admitting she had deceived the people of France. Her sentence was commuted to perpetual imprisonment. She was ordered to wear a woman's dress. She complied. But Joan's recantation lasted only days. When Cauchon and other judges visited her cell shortly after, they found her once again dressed in men's clothing. Joan stated that she had changed back of her own free will, saying the voices of St. Catherine and St. Margaret had reproached her for denying the truth to save her life. But witnesses at the 1456 rehabilitation trial provided a different account. They testified that guards had deliberately stolen Joan's dress during the night and left her nothing to wear except the men's clothing, forcing her to put it on. Whatever the precise circumstances, the result was predetermined. On May 28th, Bishop Cauchon and 7 other judges interrogated Joan in her cell. She told them she had resumed wearing men's clothing because it was necessary for protection while imprisoned among men, and that her voices had censured her for recanting. Joan's return to male clothing after swearing not to wear it was proof of relapse. Under canon law, a relapsed heretic could not be given a second chance. On May 29th, the judges unanimously agreed she must be handed over to secular authorities. The sentence was death by burning. On the morning of May 30th, 1431, Joan was allowed to receive the sacraments, an act of mercy that technically violated church law. She was then led from her cell to the Place du Vieux Marché, the old marketplace in the heart of Rouen, where a large crowd had gathered. A tall, plastered pillar had been erected in the center of the square, and Joan was tied to it. She should have been formally handed over to the bailiff of Rouen for secular sentencing, but instead the English took direct control. Joan asked to see a cross as she died. An English soldier, moved by her plea, fashioned a simple cross from 2 sticks and gave it to her. She kissed it and held it against her chest. Then a processional crucifix was brought from the church of Saint-Sauveur. Joan embraced it before her hands were bound, and it was held before her eyes as the flames were lit. As the flames rose around her, witnesses heard Joan crying out repeatedly. Her final word, shouted above the roar of the flames, was the name of Jesus. At 19 years of age, the peasant girl who had changed the course of a war died in the marketplace of Rouen. After her death, the executioners burned her remains twice more to ensure nothing was left. Her ashes were thrown into the Seine River to prevent anyone from collecting relics. The English believed they had erased Joan of Arc from history. Instead, they had created a martyr whose story would endure for centuries. 25 years later, a rehabilitation trial convened at the request of Joan's mother. The court heard testimony from 115 witnesses. The judges declared that the 1431 verdict was invalid, tainted by bias and riddled with procedural errors. In 1920, the Catholic Church canonized her as Saint Joan of Arc. The woman, burned as a heretic, became a patron saint of France. If you had been present in that Rouen marketplace on May 30th, 1431, watching as a 19-year-old girl called out to God while flames rose around her, would you have recognized the execution as judicial murder dressed in the robes of religious authority? The trial that condemned Joan was never about heresy. It was about destroying the symbol that had made French victory possible and English occupation untenable.